Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes. Your co-hosts, Jami, Albright, and Sara, Rosett, couldn't be more different. In fact, they're a study in contrasts. However, despite all of their differences, they agree that sharing what they wish they'd known, both the good and the bad, is the key to moving forward. Let's get to the show.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sara, Rosett.
And I'm Jami Albright. And today we have Jami Davis on the podcast.
Yeah, so 2 Jamies this week. Double Jami.
J square. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
As we go by, we talk about it in the podcast.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So in this interview, we talk a lot about hurdles, writing hurdles, and when you're approaching like a new stage in your career and kind of the mindset you need to have. Mm-hmm. And it was really good. We talked a lot about, transitioning through different times in your career. And Jami had a business and he sold that and went all into the writing, podcasting, and he has a lot of tips for podcasters too. So,
and he talked about having a supportive spouse that really helps. Yeah,
that's always a good thing.
It's always a good thing.
Yeah.
So, what's been going on with you this week?
Well, I have taken down the blanket fort.
Uh-huh.
So,
I
finished recording. I call it the first draft of the audio because I know I'm going to have to go back and fix things. But I've had a couple of people send me questions. So I was just going to say that if you're interested in doing that, I don't think it's really not that hard. It's time consuming. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that I've discovered. And I'm going to hire out the editing of it. So what I did was I just recorded it. And then if I made a mistake, I would clap. So it would show the spike on the sound recording, and then I could go back and quickly find those and chop out the mistake, clap, re-record, clap, re-record. And so I came out of the room one day and I was like, okay, so do y'all think I'm like applauding myself in there? I'm clapping so much because I was making
if I did it would sound like an audience full of that's how mine would sound.
Yeah, that's pretty much how mine was too. Yeah. So, but I finally kind of got it down and got everything going. And so I think that if you want to do it, it's totally doable. It's not that hard and not that expensive to get set up. You don't have to buy a whole lot of fancy equipment.
Right.
And
do you have a new mic?
I've had this one and I just didn't use it because you have to have the pop filter thing. And it takes up a lot of space on the desk. I'm afraid I'm going to bump it like I just did. Mm-hmm. But so I had all this and then, the blankets, we have blankets at home, so it's not that hard.
The umbrella.
My umbrella. Yeah. So I would say definitely it's doable. And I haven't tried the editing, but I think that you could learn that. There's courses and things that you could learn that, are not incredibly expensive. So I worked on that. And then that's been pretty much it for me this week. I've gone over to Austin to help my daughter move from one apartment to another. Mm-hmm. And I actually didn't even know what day of the week it was today because my week is so messed up.
I know. Me either.
So what about you?
Well, last Thursday, I got a call from my daughter who lives in Dallas, and there was a little bit of an emergency. And so I just got in the car and came to Dallas. And I've been here this whole time. My daughter has 3 foster children and a bio son, and she's pregnant. So, and she's under 30. So,
and I bet she's tired too.
She's tired, even though she's only under 30. So so I stayed to help, and there were some things that were just kind of unknown for a few days, but I went ahead and stayed to help her just because this week was kind of crazy for them. But one of the things that that happened was, I'm working on my book, and usually when I'm writing, like everything's got to be perfect. The mood lighting, I've got to be wearing the right thing. The smells have to be right. Yeah, exactly.
atmosphere.
Exactly. And that's probably why I write so slow, because it's not, it's hard to find those times. But while I've been here, I've had to be an opportunistic writer. And my daughter, she edits our podcast, and she works for another publisher and does a lot of stuff for them. And so she has to do the same thing. So I thought, well, if she can do it, I can do it. So I've gotten words in all this week, every day. Some days I've hit my goal. Some days I've been a little under. Yesterday I would have hit my goal, but I lost 600 words. But it was okay. It's just, but being that opportunistic writer is a concept that's been a little bit foreign to me, and I did it this week, so I know I can do it. And I might just do 500 here. When they go down for a nap, do 1,500 then, and then 500 or 1,000 later. They have a rest time where they're kind of just in the room.
All that, it does add up. And if you can, do you have trouble like getting into this story? Like when you have like,
no, I don't.
minutes?
And that's what I kind of thought I would have trouble with, but I didn't. Maybe it's because I know this story. I did find myself, like, I kind of got to the end of one part and thought, I'm not exactly sure what happens next, but I know what happens after that thing. So I just skipped on ahead. It's probably a chapter or two, maybe just one, and then started writing. So I thought, I can always go back, second pass through, I'll fix that. And that is how I write. I would have to write the first draft. If I spent my time editing, it would take me forever. So, so I've been really happy, and I've made progress, and I should be done with this first draft by the end of September. So
that is great.
I know, I'm really happy. And, of course, I'm not quite to that 20,000 word mark, which is where I freak out. So we'll see what happens.
Just pencil that in on one day, freak out day.
Yeah, exactly. But, so it's been good. It's been good, and everything worked out here, and everything's great. And
well, that's good. Well, I was going to tell you that I haven't personally verified this, but I have read that Jane Austen had a book that she was working on, and she would put it out, so that it was out like in the house somewhere, and she would, when she walked by, she would write a line. And then the next time she walked by, she would write another line. And that just blows my mind, because
me too.
I like to have my space and time and quiet to write. But so you're just like Jane Austen.
I am. I've been compared to Jane many, many times. Well, Lord. But and then also the hurricane, I was in Dallas when my husband and daughter and grandson were at our house in Houston. So, and I know you were there too. And, for a day or two, we weren't real sure what was going to happen.
And it brought back all those Harvey memories. And it was very odd, because I drove back to Houston, and it was like you drove in, stopped at the gas station to fill up with gas. And there's just like this completely different kind of low level hum of anxiety and like tension. So, but it all came to nothing. And Houston we hardly got any rain at all.
Yeah. I don't think
South Louisiana was,
I know. And we're, our
devastated.
Prayers and minds are thoughts are with those people. And if you're one of those people, know that we're thinking about you. So anyway, well, let's get on with the interview.
Yeah. We've rambled enough.
We have.
Here's Jami.
All right, today we have Jami Davis on the podcast with us. Jami Davis is a nurse, retired paramedic, author, and host of the Books and Authors Fantasy Podcast. He loves everything fantasy and sci-fi, and especially the places where stories intersect with his love of medicine or gaming.
Thank you. Yeah, I love when my real life intersects with my fantasy book life. So
tell us how you got into writing.
Oh, I've been a medical journalist for about 15 years. And so I've been writing nonfiction stuff for a long time, articles and stuff like that. But in 2014, November rolled around, and somebody dared me to do NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. And I said, well, what's that? I've never heard of it before. And looked into it. And I'm like, 50,000 words, that's a lot, but I'm up for the challenge. I had an idea actually for a fiction story rattling around in my head for a long time, since I used to ride the ambulance. And So I went and took that story about a supernatural paramedic, and that became my first project. And I wrote it and got NaNoWriMo done in that month of November 2014. And that book was actually, I self-published that book the following August.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I actually learned about NaNoWriMo from you at the Smarter Artist Summit in 2016 when we first met. We were in a cab or a Uber or something. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
I didn't really remember. I didn't really know exactly what it was. So for our listeners who don't exactly know what NaNoWriMo is, can you tell them what?
Yes, it stands for National Novel Writing Month. It's NaNoWriMo. So if you take the beginnings of all those words and put them together, it makes NaNoWriMo. It is November of every year. Authors and people who want to be authors get together virtually online, and we try to write 50,000 words or more in a single month. So that's basically the goal, is to write a short novel or a short novel length piece of something within that time frame. And there's a website, NaNoWriMo.org, that lets you track your progress, and you get badges and awards, and there's a social function with it. And so I've been doing it ever since. I do it every year. I always have a project set aside for NaNoWriMo each year. I look forward to it. I spend the last couple weeks of October plotting it and getting ready. And that's something I really look forward to, because it did get me started writing, and I really try to honor that and support others through doing it myself and encouraging them to complete their projects as well.
That is very cool. I've never done Nano, and I've always thought that November is like the most stressful month. Only more stressful would be December, because you've got Christmas in there, because you got in the United States, you have Thanksgiving and stuff. So yeah, so maybe someday I'll do that. But I think it's been it's a good inspiration for a lot of people. It gives you that connection with other people that you don't normally get. So what was your first big success?
Actually, it was that initial book, Extreme Medical Services, about paramedics who take care of supernatural creatures, in secret in their town. And I already had a pretty good list of medical people that I had following me as a journalist. And so I kind of hit that list, to kind of help with the launch. And it really, springboarded it up the charts. So, enough to get some traction. And so it did quite well. And I got a lot of good reviews and a lot of people reaching out to me saying, when's the next one? And of course I hadn't really planned for a next one. So I was like, I guess I got to write another one. So it's a never ending process now, but back then it was quite daunting to, I got to write another book and what do I write about? And what's the next part of this story and things like that.
So is that
How long did it take you to write? Sorry, Sarah. How long did it take you to write that second book?
If I remember correctly, I think it took me I would say three months, maybe 3 or 4 months. It's about 60,000 words, to get it done. And the first book was a process of years, because the idea had been kicking around in my head for a while. And then, of course, by the time I actually wrote it, it took probably 9-10 months to get it done. But the second book, once I decided on the story, it was easy to kind of flow into the characters again. And I've always been a storyteller, I guess. And so my family never takes anything I say at face value, because I always embellish things. So that's just... my kids grew up with me kind of leading them astray until they figured out I was joking. And so my storytelling, I think, comes naturally, which once I kind of let that flow into my writing, I think it helps me keep stories moving along.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's this, my husband feels the same way, because he's like, there's this story, it's like a joke, but this woman's at a party and she's telling the whole room about their cross-country trip and all the trials and tribulations and everything that happens, and people are just rolling on the floor laughing. I mean, she has them in the palm of her hand, and when she finishes, her husband said, "We flew." So he said that is a little too close to home for us, because I do tend to embellish. If it's a good story, let's just keep it going.
Or put it in a book.
Or put it in a book. Yeah. So tell us what you wish you'd known about writing and craft.
Wow. I think what I needed to do was, writing as a journalist is just completely different from a process standpoint. And so when I wrote my fiction stories, it was really my spoken voice coming out on the page. And so I really needed a lot of work, and I needed to learn not to leave cliffhangers. And so my first 2 books actually have like major cliffhangers in them. And I keep saying I should probably go back and fix that. But, I'd rather keep working on the next book, and people don't complain too much because the next book's there to get. So they don't, they just roll right into the following book. But there's a couple of things. I think I needed to learn how to wrap a story up. It took me 3 books to figure out how to end a book. And it took me some time to kind of find my voice. And I think that's, I knew how to write, but I didn't know how to write fiction well. And that was something I had to kind of discover along the way.
Yeah. I've heard this from journalists before, that because though they're used to writing on deadline, they're used to kind of being, concise and basically getting the job done, that it is easier for them in a lot of ways to finish to write faster, to finish a book. Do you find that?
And I would agree with that, because I'm used to thinking words and putting them out through my fingers, on a typewriter or a keyboard. I'm very used to taking that process happening. It's just different. I just changed it into story. And I think that's why my earlier books are much more almost conversational, because I'm telling the story to myself as I go along. And that's what that's the way I'm typing it. So I learned a little bit more as I went along about narrative and descriptive things. I still write very sparsely in my first draft, and then I have to go back and add color to the story. There's a lot of dialogue in the first draft, but I need to add, all right, they came into a room. What did the room look like? That kind of stuff just never gets into my first draft at all. I'm straight to the action.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been using dictation, and I've noticed I use a lot more dialogue when I'm dictating, because it's just, you bounce back and forth. And then later when I go back in, I have to add in some of those details, and it's just easier for me to do it that way for some reason. I don't know why. So switching to marketing, what do you wish you had known about marketing?
It's interesting, because I'd run my own business for a long time as a podcaster. I understood some of that ahead of time. I think I had a head start on a lot of authors. Because I thought about this coming into this podcast, and I was like, what would I say I didn't know? Because I had a list. I think if I'd done anything differently, it would have been spent that 10 months of editing and reworking the story before I published to actually build a fiction list. In other words, work my existing medical lists that I had and bring them over into the story world and develop them into avid readers. And that's something, honestly, I think you, Jami, are really super at. You really do a good job of engaging readers. And I know you did that with your first book, is created a list ahead of time. And I think so. I think authors think, well, I can't have a list until I have a book. And I think that's not the case. So
right.
I think that's something I could have done.
I think there's so many things now even that we didn't have, you started a couple of years before me, but that we didn't have back then. But there are tons of things that you can do to build a list now. I mean, Ryan Z, we had him on the podcast, his book sweeps. If you have a free novella or a free book, you can build a list that way. Book Funnel has tons of promos for list building. And I think you're right. I think that building that list is so, so important. It just really sets you up for, I think it sets you up for success. I just do. So
yeah. You're one of the few people we've talked to that have actually had any kind of list before they started. I think you and Jami are the exceptions to the rule. That
J square. We always say
we do. It's us. I tell you. It's funny when we're in a room together. I mean, somebody yells Jami, we both our heads.
We both look, yeah.
We see each other and we start laughing because I think there were the only two Jamies in the author world, or at least the only ones we know. So
we know, yeah, exactly. I mean, how square can we be though to call ourselves J Square? And I'm really the only one that does it. Jami does it really.
I do it too. No, it's there. It's there.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. You're the host of your long-running podcast for nursing, and then you also have the fiction podcast. For authors who'd like to podcast, what advice do you have for them? Anything you wish you'd known about podcasting? Sarah and I could do a whole show on this.
Yes, we're taking notes right now.
I mean, I've been actually helping podcasters get their shows started for years because I've been doing it since podcasting started practically. And I've seen a lot of changes over the years. The biggest thing I tell people that want to start a podcast is you don't need a lot of fancy equipment. And it's great if you want to spend some money and get a decent mic and some things like that. But you don't have to have those things. What you'd have to have is a will to start the podcast. And I think that's the hardest thing that people find is they're afraid to do that first episode. And I think it's like writing a first draft. It's like sitting down and putting words to the page. You're afraid that it's going to suck. Well, guess what? Your first episode is absolutely going to be the worst episode. And every episode after that will get a little bit better. Right. If you listen to my first episodes, they're out there in the ether somewhere. They're me at my kitchen table with an old Radio Shack microphone. And it sounds horrible and boomy and stuff. But so I think it's just starting the show and being willing to do it. The other thing is having a vision for what you want it to be. And so is it going to be a half-hour interview show? Is it going to be a show where you're going to talk about craft? And what's that mean? Are you going to have segments where, this is the craft segment, this is the marketing segment, this is the, there's lots of different ways to set it up, but it helps to have a vision for that template of what your show's going to look like. And so that what the listeners will expect from you is important. And finally, the last thing is having a schedule, letting your listeners come to expect your episodes on whatever day it is you're going to release. When they wake up Monday morning, if your show comes out Mondays, they know they're going to open their phone up and your show is going to be there waiting for them to listen to on their way to work. Back when people used to go to work, or the way downstairs to make coffee and then sit down in their pajama bottoms and their nice blouse in front of their screen while they work. And so I think that, it's just important to be on a regular schedule. So just do it, have a format, and have a regular schedule for when the show comes out.
So how do you balance? You have the 2 podcasts, you have writing that you also do. How do you balance all that? Because podcasts are time consuming. It is time consuming. I mean, I'm a full-time, I stopped, I used to have 7 weekly podcasts plus articles I wrote. I also ran a network for medical podcasts that had 40 different programs on it. And I went and ran advertising for all of that. Wow.
I sold that business right after I guess 2017, 2018, I guess, early 2018, I sold that business. I was talking to a couple of author friends of mine who we were talking about how we were balancing just these things. And they said, when you talk about writing, you're all animated and happy. And when you talk about your other business, your shoulders droop and you get all sad. And they said, you need to get rid of that. And at that point, my books were making enough money that I could probably afford to get rid of some of it, especially if I sold the business. So I sold the business. I put it out there to some people that I'd partnered with over the years, and they bought my equipment. They bought, I had a multi-camera studio I traveled around the country with to medical conferences, and I sold all that stuff. I kept one podcast that had a sponsor that wanted me to keep doing the show. And as long as they'll keep paying me, I'll keep doing the show. I have a co-host who does all the scheduling and things. I just kind of show up and do the show every Thursday. So that's easy. And then but I also wanted to start the next podcast because I wanted to start a podcast about writing. So I wanted to interview authors and talk about fantasy books. And So I already had the knowledge and the skill to do that. So it wasn't a huge curve in my schedule to carve out to do that. But I really focus on writing. My main goals for my business, and I do set goals and I review them on a regular basis. My main goals for my business are to put out books. And I'm a firm believer in that old adage that nothing sells your last book like your next book. If you want to sell your back catalog, have another book come out, because people discover you and look at and then go and look at all the books you have, and they start buying all the books. At least some of them do. Yeah. And I think that's, how I've been able to make it work is I've become a full-time writer, but I wasn't always. And it was hard at times to balance that, honestly. And ultimately I had to make a decision to do one or the other.
Yeah. Well, looking back at the beginning when you started writing, what assumptions did you make about your writing career, and did they turn out to be right or wrong?
I've always believed in myself. I think I built a business and had been successful with it. So I believed in my ability to tell a story. I think because that first book kind of caught on a little bit initially, and I realized that I had something there, it gave me the confidence to keep going. And when the subsequent books in that series continued to get good reviews and be well accepted by the readers, it kept pushing me to go on. So I think my assumptions early were that I could do this, that my words had worth. And I think that's something, does that mean I don't deal with imposter syndrome? No, I absolutely do. I'm in the middle of a book right now that I actually stopped and started writing a short story because I just was stuck. And I was doubting where the story was going. And I needed to take a break. But I took a break by writing something else. And that's kind of how I refocus myself, is pull a character from something else and write a short story about them.
Right.
And honestly,
that's a great idea, though. I mean, that's just kind of a palate cleanser, and it can get you back on track sometimes.
And in this particular one, I decided to write a short story from the world in which my current project is set. And the short story became the answer to my problem.
I love that. I love that.
I didn't plan it, but the character that I created for this short story is now I have to go back and add them to the beginning of the book, because they're the answer. They're the solution to why the story wasn't moving along. I needed this other subplot to kind of carry things in the slow parts of the book. And so you never know where that inspiration is going to come from. And so when you get stuck on something, don't be afraid to say, okay, I'm not getting rid of it. I'm going to put it aside, and I'm going to write, a 5,000 word short story. And maybe you can write that in a week or 2 weeks, however fast you write.
Right.
And it'll just help you kind of reset your brain, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. I'm at my mom's right now, and she just said to me, because I gave her my book, the new book, and she said, every time I read it, I kind of can't believe it. But then I remember that you just don't really give up. And, I've said that about 1 million times on this podcast. You only fail if you give up. And so if you get stuck, pivoting and doing something else for a bit, that's not giving up. That's just taking your creativity in a different direction. And so I think that's great advice. So what was the biggest gamble you think you've taken in your writing career?
A couple of years ago, when you guys had Craig Martell on recently,
right, yeah.
Which, great. I'm following Craig. So everybody, when you get bored with this episode, go back and listen to Craig. He's much better than I am. But honestly, the biggest gamble I took was spending the money that I didn't quite have and convincing my wife to come with me and go to Bali. That trip was expensive. Right? Yeah, that was
a conference. Yeah.
It was 20 books Bali. It was limited to 50 people. There there were people like Mark Dawson and Kevin J. Anderson, Rebecca Moesta, Michael Anderle, Craig Martell, and a host of other authors that either were at a certain level or wanted to be at a certain level. And I think at the time I was right on the cusp of that line. It was, it's not cheap to fly halfway around the world, and certainly not when you take your wife with you. The tickets were not cheap. They were $3,500, I think, to go. And, that's, people might go, that's insane. It was all inclusive. So it included your hotel room, it included some meals, it included everything. Because it was meant to be that kind of like immersive, all-inclusive project. And Craig Martell ran it. It was small groups. We are still I'm still really close to a lot of the people that I went to Bali with. And had I not gone on that trip, I don't think I would have had the gumption to continue. I had just gone full time. So I don't know if I would have had the gumption to continue, but the relationships that I found there, some really amazing authors that a few of them I later found out were also in a similar position of, am I going forward or am I stopping this thing?
Right.
And we all kind of found that impetus to keep moving. And so I'm not telling people to spend money they don't have, because I think everyone needs to make that decision for themselves. But there will come something, I think, some hurdle in your writing career that'll require you to stretch. And it might be a stretch financially. It might be a stretch personally. It might be a stretch on a time management sense. I don't know what your hurdle is going to be, but I honestly believe that everybody reaches that hurdle, and how you make yourself climb over it, get through it, go around it, whatever it is you need to do, will determine where you go next.
Right. And I think you have several of those along the way. That first 20 books, that first Smarter Artist Summit, I didn't really have the money, and I tell that story. I returned my Christmas presents and, everything to go to that. I didn't even have a book out. And so there was this feeling of, I don't know if I really belong here, but there was just something in my gut that said I needed to be there. And it was the best money it's the best thing I ever did for I don't think I would be writing or writing at this level and having this as my career had I not gone to that.
Well, and you're right. That's where I met Craig. I met a ton of people at that conference. And I didn't really have the time or the energy or the money to go to that conference. At the time, I was traveling to 10 medical conferences a year.
Wow.
And running a full television studio on the conference floor, interviewing researchers and things. And it was just a huge headache. And I think that first Smarter Artist Summit, I came back, I was home for a day, and I turned around and left again. And I really just didn't feel like going anywhere.
Right.
I was exhausted. And then I came back from that conference and I was just rejuvenated and energized.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right, Jami. I think there are probably hurdles like that I have yet to encounter too.
I just had one with this release, just a financial kind of how am I going to invest in this? How much am I going to invest in this sort of thing? And it was a gamble. It paid off, but it was a gamble. And but I think like with the Smarter Artist Summit, and I say this a lot, but I met you, I met Sara, I met our friend Danielle. We met so many people, and only a couple of the people that I met there that I'm really close with do write what I write. But it wasn't making the connections within your genre. It was making connections with other indie authors that wanted to go the same place you wanted to go. And that's what's so important, I think, when you're kind of plotting out your indie career and you're sort of confused about a lot of things. Find the people that are going where you want to go and get with them. And I just think that's
so. I'll go ahead, Sara.
I was just going to say that's hard. I was just going to say that's hard to do right now because of COVID, because nobody's meeting.
It is.
But, you can meet online right now, but there is something about being in person that is just invaluable. Like you just develop a different type of connection with people. And, I know we're all looking forward to the day when we can go back and travel and do things again. And I think we'll all we'll value it even more because we can't do it right now. So it's shown us how important it is. And the conferences are I'm an introvert, so I don't love to go to the conferences. Like you were saying, Jami, that you didn't really want to go. Sometimes I'm like, do I really want to take the time to travel and the money? But it's always worth it. I don't think I've ever gone to anything where I was like, oh, well, that was a waste of time. So it's a good thing to do.
And Jami said something important, because I think it's important, while it's important to connect with authors in your genre for marketing purposes and for cross support and things like that, I think it's super important to connect with authors outside your genre too. Craig and I are friends. Craig's a sci-fi writer. I'm a fantasy writer. Jami and I are friends. Romance is not anything. I mean, my first couple of books, my wife had me go back and write in a romantic storyline, not a big one, but because she's like, they got to have somebody. Right. And because I'm just I'm a dumb guy. I just don't do romance. And now it's become something I make a point to include some kind of, not a major plot line, but there has to be some kind of interest, a wink or a nudge or something that says, hey, I like that person.
Yeah. I think it's just so important. Have you ever made a mistake that turned out to be a good thing?
I'm sure I have, because I make mistakes all the time.
Well, you do.
But I can't think of one to answer that one off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Well, that is okay.
I could almost be certain that I will think of 10 when we get done this call.
Of course. That's me too. But we have a follow-up. What about the opposite? Have you ever had a thought that you thought was just like the best plan ever, and then it turned out to kind of be a flop? Have you had anything go like that?
Oh, yeah, I can do that.
We can all do that.
So last year, I had written a series with somebody, and they had published it themselves through their small press, and it did well enough. It wasn't a gangbusters success, but it did well enough. But I also felt after a year or so that it wasn't being marketed very well, and I thought I could do better. So I spent the money to buy out their half of the investment in the project. What we put into covers and editing and stuff, which was not an insubstantial amount of money for 5 books in a series. And I said, I just read the relaunch book, and I said, I'm gonna relaunch these suckers. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be epic. And I lost my shirt. You remember this, Jami? We were talking to each other regularly during that time frame. Yeah. It was a horrible flop. Those books still earn a little bit, but I'll be surprised if I ever earn back the money I spent buying them back and then trying to relaunch them with ads and push and everything. So, here's the thing. I kept going. I reset. I actually went back and wrote another book in my original series, the Extreme Medical Services series, kind of reset, reconnected with my original readers, and went back to the beginning, I guess, and just said, I'm just gonna put that behind me. Those books are still there, and they make a little bit every month, and but you're gonna have those. And here's the thing: when you're an indie author, you are the publishing company too. You're not just the author. And guess what? Look at publishing companies. How many books do they put out? How many are major hits, and how many don't sell? So you're going to write books. You're going to commit to writing a series, and it's not going to do well. And does that mean you're not a good author? No, it just means your idea for what you thought would connect with readers didn't hit this time. Right. Maybe that book will become popular 10 years from now when somebody makes a movie about books that are similar to that, and you're able to glom onto that in a marketing push. Right. But you've got to kind of hold that hope out there. But in the meantime, you just reset and go back to something more familiar or something more sure, I guess, and try to reconnect with your readers. And and an important thing to do is to survey your readers. I don't think we do this enough. Don't be afraid to ask your readers on your list or wherever you get them, 2 or 3 questions a couple times a year to find out what they like, what else are they reading, what other books that are similar to yours they're reading. Simple questions like that. Leave it open-ended so that they have to write something more than yes or no, and then see what they're reading. If who your super readers are after you've written a few books. They're the ones that are responding to all your emails and answering all your Facebook posts, and so trust them to say, yeah, this book's kind of like your book, and then see what it is about that book if it's really successful. That maybe read it. Actually, sit down and read it, and say, what parts of this book might be connecting and clicking better than what I wrote in my book, and maybe there's a slight shift, just little change that could make a big difference.
Yeah, I've done that. I've asked my readers what they're reading, and I got so many responses that I compiled it all together. And later on, I made one of my emails was like Sarah's readers recommend, and it was really an interesting experiment. And it's an interesting list because it's not the books that I would have thought, and it's been one of the things that's helped me understand my readers better. I think that's really valuable to do that.
Yeah, somebody once told me, and I think and I forget who said it, and probably more than one person has said it, but you are not your reader. You might like that cover, and it's not gonna click. You might like this story, but it's not gonna click, or at least not the way you thought it would. And so you've got to really think about, you're not your reader. You got to kind of really understand who your reader is.
Very true.
So what changes have you seen in your genre over the course of your author career, and how have you adapted to that?
One of the things that has changed, I think, a lot is that it's a significant portion of the urban fantasy, which is the genre I write, has shifted into paranormal romance. And shifting is all puns intended there, because a lot of them are shifter romances. And so nowadays, if I try to market directly to what I think are urban fantasy readers, a lot of them are really paranormal romance readers. Okay. And like I've said before, I'm not a romance writer. Right. There might be some romance, but it's all closed door, off the page, and it's nothing to do with the main storyline at all. Right. So they're looking for that. They're not gonna find it in my books. And so I have to be a little different and a little more judicious in how I connect with certain readers. And I've been able to do that with some of it with your help, Jami, on, how to connect with Facebook audiences better and for advertising and things like that. Mm-hmm. But that's been the biggest change in my primary genre, which is urban fantasy, is that a lot of the readers there are really paranormal romance readers.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the urban fantasy that I read, which is a lot of trad publish. I have 3 really that I love, urban fantasy writers: Alona Andrews, Faith Hunter, and Patricia Briggs. Mm-hmm. And they do have romance in, but I think in their main series, the romance comes very much later. Mm-hmm. There's several books before it's leading you there. But then I think about some others that I've read recently, and you're right. There are quite a few. There's a lot of romance in those. I just hadn't really put it all together. That's so interesting. And so do you think your readers want that? Or do you think that you found the readers that kind of don't care or don't really
a little subset, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just requires targeting a little bit better, and really being upfront about what the story is and what it isn't. Yeah. Part of that is going to come out in cover design. You really need to target your cover design well, either by having a cover designer you trust to do it for you, or to have a good handle on the books that you want to relate to, right. And what the covers in that are grabbing those readers pull in and giving that to a cover designer and saying, this is what my book cover needs to look like. These color schemes, this type of main character on the cover with a weapon or whatever, no bare shirt, no signs of, man chest and any of that stuff that a romance will trigger a romance reader to say, oh, I think I'll like this book. And then if they get it, at least I will have felt like I haven't led them down the path. The same thing with my blurb and stuff like that. I don't want to put anything in there that leads them to think there's anything to do with romance in this story.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I've sort of been doing that lately, since Nink last year with a subtitle. Especially with this new book, I put a slow burn sports rom-com because it is a slow burn. I mean, we're all way through the book before they really get together, and some people don't like slow burns, and so I want them to know that. But I also put it on the cover of the book. I mean, it's like you have to put it both places, to be okay with it. Yeah, in compliance. Thank you. With Amazon, but with my bride's book, same thing. I have it's a trope, but but that trope also tells them what they're not getting. If they're wanting this thing and they look at my books, it's not going to be that because they see it on the cover or they see it in the subtitle. So
and there are plenty of people who write books that I write. I mean, there's Jim Butcher and Kevin Hearn and, all of these great, urban fantasy writers who have a little bit of romance, but it doesn't come till later books. And my books the romances have developed so that by like book 4 or 5, there was a romance that had developed, but it kind of developed the way I develop romances, which is kind of like discovery slowly over time while she's trying to hit me over the head with a club and drag me off to her cave. I think that's okay. And I think my readers kind of like that.
Yeah. Well, it's true to your voice. It's true to you. Yeah.
What's the best thing you've done to set yourself up for success?
Get my wife to buy into me doing this.
Yeah.
It was a big leap to sell a business and that was successful. It helps that she's way more successful financially and in business than I am. So that's always a help, but she never has doubted me. And I know how lucky I am in that because I know from many people I know that their spouses or significant others are not super supportive of them, but I was able to get her to buy in early. She's my she's my alpha reader. She gets the books before everybody else gets them. She hasn't read all of my books because I started writing a lot faster, but she reads all of my early series. Any new books in those series that come out, she reads. When I really need her to read something, she'll put aside what she's doing and dig into it for me if I think something's not quite hitting right. So I think for me, that number one thing was getting her buy-in. But we're very much a partnership couple, always have been. We don't make any major decisions without talking about it and coming to a consensus first. And this was a big decision. This is, doing a new business, doing a new venture. So for us, it was important that come along.
Right. And you are, and I say that I am too. I'm very lucky. I have the same kind of support. He doesn't read my books because he's not my audience, but my husband is so super supportive. But I go to conferences and I hear, you've heard it too, people whose spouses, I think it's harder for men too, because in a lot of cases, not every case, but a lot of cases, they are the primary breadwinner or they have the insurance or something like that. So it is a bigger leap, but it's so hard when you don't have spousal support. It's almost impossible, I think, because it drains you of creativity and motivation, and then you feel guilty, so I think you're right. You picked a good one.
And spouses comes up a lot with this question. I've been surprised that a lot of people, that's the first thing they say, that they pick the right person. So
where can people find you, Jami?
They can find me over at JamiDavisBooks.com, and that's JAMIE books.com. I'm really active on Facebook, so you can probably find me there under Jami Davis Books or just look up Jami Davis. I will be one of the ones probably pops up quickly because I'm very active there. On Twitter, you can find me under the handle Podmedic, PODMEDIC. That dates back to when I used to be a medical journalist and a podcaster.
Yeah.
I always am happy to talk to people. If you were thinking about starting a podcast, I will happily spend, an hour on the phone with you, talking you through the process and getting you at least a little bit started down the road. I'm just happy to help people out. A lot of people helped me get to where I am, both as a journalist and a podcaster, as well as an author. And I am 100% believing that it's my job to pass that along.
Yep.
Well, that is great. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I look forward to folks listening to this episode and hopefully getting something positive to help them down the path out of it.
Oh, I think they will. So we'll have all the show notes and links at the website, and that is wishidknownmenforwriters.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.